Just texted Rodney the information. He'll be on shortly.
Mr. Clerk,
Yeah,
we ready to go here?
ready to go.
Okay, this is a meeting of the Finance Subcommittee. There are a number of referred to this subcommittee. Mr. Clerk?
Councilor Elliott.
Here.
Councilor Conway.
Here.
Councilor Noon.
Here.
Three present.
President, thank you, everyone. Let me also let the record reflect that Council Mercier, Councilor Damaris, Councilor Conway, Councilor Chow, Councilor Drinkwater have also joined the discussion. So with that,
Councilor Rourke as well.
excuse me, Councilor Rourke. I am sorry, I didn't see your picture. So thank you, Mr. Clerk. So with that, there was one motion, a couple of motions that we have on this agenda. The first one being a report or a presentation from the Chief Financial Officer, who has also joined us along with the Deputy Chief Financial Officer. We have the auditor. So why don't we go right into the presentation, because I know an hour is sometimes never enough time for a finance meeting, but let's go right to it. So Mr. Baldwin, if you don't mind, I know you have a presentation that was before the council and referred here. So if you don't mind, if you can just jump right into it, we'll go to question and answers immediately followed.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And if it's okay with the subcommittee and the members of the council, I'm going to share my screen and just jump right in here. So as the chairman said, we had a presentation come before the city council, I believe at the last meeting that was referred here to the subcommittee for additional discussion. And I collapsed some of the information for the sake of brevity and updated some of the charts. And we'll just go through these here. We're going to focus on FY 2020, which is currently at the end of the audit stage, but we've closed the books on 2020, and it's important for the purposes of this subcommittee to take a look at how the year ended, especially with the overarching theme of COVID-19, how that impacted the budget, how we ended up, so that we can get a sense of where we're at as we begin to look forward to FY 2022. And so I'll without further ado, I'll jump right in. The first place to start is in the year-end undesignated fund balance. So as you can see from the chart, which highlights here and over the years, the year-ending position of the general fund, In FY 2020, there was a reduction in the undesignated fund balance from a level of over $10 million to just over $6 million. But then I updated this chart to include our year-to-date figure, which is back up in the $9.1 million range, and comparatively speaking, that is in relatively good shape. The reduction is due to a number of factors, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here right now, but part of that was a reserve of the fund balance for encumbrance, and it had to do with a purchase in the school department it was reserved, encumbered in a purchase order at the end of year, but the actual payout didn't occur until 2021, so the activity kind of crossed the fiscal threshold. However, we are still in a position of relative strength as it compares to prior years. And if you look back to 2010, 2011, the year-end undesignated fund balance was much lower than what we've seen in the last few years. So the general fund is the major operating fund for the city, but the city maintains many different types of funds, some of which are governed by state law. Typically what we talk about the most, and I've just included a selection here for the subcommittee. Number one is the stabilization account, or what we sometimes refer to as the rainy day fund. So there's two amounts listed here for each one of these funds, which I'll just kind of call out. The general stabilization or rainy day fund at the end of FY 2020 was at what I'll say is a historic high of over $12 million. Now, some of that was used in the FY 2021 budget to balance the finance plan. So as we sit here today, that the rainy day fund has an amount of $10.9 million. However, we are still awaiting the free cash certification, and part of the plan, as we have done for the past few years, will be to recommend an appropriation from free cash back into the stabilization fund to maintain that level. And that will be part of the consideration once free cash is certified. So, these other ones are small, relatively speaking, but they're mentioning. Perpetual care is one that we use in the cemeteries. Next is the Health Benefits Trust. And this is the leftover from the, some of you may remember, the city used to be self-insured for health insurance and maintained a health benefits trust to fund health insurance ever since approximately FY 2013. We've moved to a pay-as-you-go model. We're insured through the Group Insurance Commission. The Health Benefits Trust was no longer needed, and the amount that was left over, the city took its portion of what was left, because it was a 75-25 split between the city and the employees who paid into this fund. The 75% of the city share was used to seed the OPEB trust, which is existing, and we've talked about this in previous budget years. But this amount here represents the employee share, this $3.1 million. That remains on the books. It is still in the care of the city treasurer, but is awaiting a plan for disbursement from the PEC. Other funds that I'll just mention here, the Municipal Facility Stabilization, which was recently set up, and that is populated or seeded with money on a pro-rata share from the local option excise on marijuana. So every time quarterly, we receive receipts from the one dispensary that is open, and that is on adult use. 25% of those totals goes into the stabilization account, which was set up for the purpose of maintaining the city's building. And then finally, an update on the Community Preservation Fund. There is currently a $1.4 million balance in that fund, and that is still the logistics of the committee are still being set up, but once that is up and running, it will make recommendations to the council, and then the council will be asked to make appropriations on projects related to the community preservation.
Hey, Connor, can we, this is Rodney, can we just, I want to stop you just a second to ask a couple of questions, because I know the report will continue, and I don't want to get, I have a number of questions on this. So just going back to the stabilization fund, the rainy day fund, it's at 10.9 million. We, in order to balance this year's budget and not raise taxes any more than we had to, we dipped into the rainy day fund. So this balance includes, us using some of that fund for this year's budget. What was that dollar figure again?
It was approximately $1.3 million that was used, and we had planned to use a larger amount, but once we set the tax rate, we didn't need as much. So $1.3 million was the amount used to set the tax rate just recently.
In fact, there was a 300, we used $300,000 to reduce the tax rate even further.
From the overlay.
Right. Okay, good. Secondly, can we just go to the health trust benefits? I do recall the purpose of this, and that was to cover claim overages or claim offs.
Runoffs.
So this is the balance. It says health benefits trust funds from the PEC, public employee contributions, correct? And there's a committee set up. So is there a plan to use that money? What is the status of it? I know it can be used for very specific purposes.
That's right, Mr. Chairman. There's only certain uses that are permitted for this amount under the law. And so the city has an agreement with the PEC that the PEC will present a plan for how to disperse those funds to the city manager, and we're just awaiting that.
Okay, so can I make a motion that we get a report or a request a plan? Because, this fund was set up to help cover, those costs that were not covered from the previous plan. And in fact, even for the subscribers, people are hurting now, and maybe that, these funds can be used to help them. It is money that was contributed for a particular purpose. So if there's no objection, I entertain a motion from members of the subcommittee that we request from the PEC to present to the council, to the city manager, to the finance subcommittee, a plan on potential uses, or if there is no plan, then, can we invest it into, can we invest it? I know that there's a huge millions of dollars in obligations from the OPEB that we have started working on, but it helps our bond rating and helps a whole lot of things. But so I'm going to kind of stop here and ask my fellow committee members their thoughts on it.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to get a report on it, but also have a question after we vote on it, sir.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
motion is there to Council Noon to request a plan.
Report.
And a report on the health benefit trust. Council Conway, Mr.
yeah,
Conway?
a second.
Second on that, Mr. Conway, anything else?
All set for now.
Nothing?
Right.
Okay, thank you. It's, I think it'd be important to find out what it is and how we can help the employees with the money that they have contributed. And lastly, on the municipal facility stabilization, how we get 25% goes into that stabilization for marijuana revenues. Where does the remaining 75%, does that go back into
The general fund, Mr. Chairman.
and there are specific uses for this one again, is that correct?
So typically the rule under the law is the whole of all general fund receipts belong to the all municipal receipts belong to the general fund. There is a provision under the statute for stabilization funds where municipalities can designate at least 25% of any new fee or fine or municipal receipt to a stabilization fund, and that is what the council did. I want to say a year and a half ago, perhaps,
Okay.
was to set up this fund to take this new source of revenue and take 25% of it to go into the stabilization fund. The other 75 are deposited with the general fund.
Okay, and along the same lines as the prior trust of their plans, knowing that we clearly have deficits that we could cover or work in municipal facilities, is there a plan? I know there's only 156, 157, and I don't mean only, but anything, is there a plan for deferred maintenance throughout the city somehow, or am I jumping the gun here?
I think that it is early in the process, and as more dispensaries open up and this fund begins to accumulate a larger, more significant balance, it will be critical in helping the DPW to finance, whether it's repairs to public safety buildings, regular municipal buildings, and perhaps schools. That it will become part of the budget financing plan as a source of revenue to help ease the burden on the tax levy.
Thank you. I don't know if other members of the subcommittee have questions on this, and then I'll open up to the other members of the city council that have joined us. And I just think this is a slide that we may have some questions. Council Noon, I presume on community preservation, you may have some questions. Council Noon and then Council Conway.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have questions surrounding the community preservation fund. We have now $1.4 million, and the committee that the manager set up, are they in place? Have they met yet? Or where are we at on that?
I think there's a communication tonight, Councilor, regarding the CPC, and they have in
Okay.
their inaugural meeting, February upcoming, and at that meeting, according to the memo, is that they'll be electing a chairperson and other offices as required under the law.
Okay. So the other question I have, Mr. Chairman, around the health benefit trust, the $3.1 million right now, and as the CFO indicated that used to be set up, that it used to cover the claim runoff. So is there any anticipation of claim runoff in the future with that $3.1 million?
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Thank you.
I think we are far enough away from the closing of the fund that there is not a need for additional runoff consideration.
So we could use that money to do something else, or to put into other funds, as the chairman suggested.
I just want to be clear that this represents the employee share, so it would require the input, at least, of the PEC.
I see. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. CFO.
Yeah, let me be clear. I don't want to take this money away from the employees, but if there's not a plan in place, we could invest it for a time being rather than let it sit there. I presume that we're going to get a plan, and a good plan to help employees, especially at this particular point in time. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Not looking to sweep it by any stretch. This is money that has been contributed by the employees, and I'm sure there will be a worthy cause for it to be expended. Councilor Conway?
I'm all set right now, Mr. Chairman.
I don't have the entire view of other members of the city council. If there are questions, please just jump in, because on this Zoom, I only have the side-by-side gallery view. No other questions? Okay, Mr. Baldwin, can you proceed with the next slide? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll walk quickly through the next few pieces of information. This chart here on the screen displays the city's year-end cash balance, and this is a historical perspective going back to 2012. The high cash position of the city at year-end 2020 of 143 million has a lot to do with the amount of capital investments being made by the city. So as the city has financed through the sale of bonds, for capital projects, we have seen an influx of cash. And this is just to display that metric for the council. To talk a little more about debt, this is a year-over-year chart that shows the outstanding debt at the end of the year. So 2020, you want to look to the left side of the screen. We had just around $300 million in outstanding debt. And you can't see it from this chart, but relatively speaking, that is an affordable amount on either a per capita basis, which, you know, we put these types of metrics in the budget if the public were interested to see. The orange bar that goes across the screen from left to right represents the amount of authorized unissued debt, which is a term we use for loan orders that are outstanding, which we have not permanently financed, and so we are not yet in repayment. And you can see that the spike that begins there in 2018 represents the amount associated with the Lowell High School loan order. You know, I will note that the high school was authorized then in 2018, but that high school projects, much like water and sewer projects, are outside of the statutory debt limit. So they do not count towards a municipality's debt limit. And we'll talk about that in the next slide here, which lays out those numbers. I know this is a lot of information on the screen, but this is a calculation of the city's borrowing capacity. And just to skip right to the bottom line, even considering the city's outstanding debt, including the high school, including the capital projects that have been authorized by the council, as of the end of the last fiscal year, the city still had $251 million in additional debt capacity. So that is a metric that indicates we are managing our debt well. However, it is the repayment and the debt service impact on the budget that the council and the city manager and her administration need to be mindful of, and that we manage during the annual budget process. And just to note, if anyone is interested in any of this information, it is also included in the annual budget. So now I'm going to turn the presentation to talk about revenues, and specifically about 2020, how we ended the year as it relates to revenues. And this lays out the different categories that we account for revenues. So taxes, licenses and permits, charges for services, intergovernmental revenue, and miscellaneous revenue. Overall on the year, the city did hit the mark. And you can see that it's that fourth quarter that really represented a beginning of a dip in the revenues. And we'll talk a little bit more about some specific areas where we saw some reductions in revenues. But overall, you know, 2020 was not overly impacted by COVID from a revenue perspective. And this, you know, so we'll see here, and there's two that I want to call out to the subcommittee and the councilors here's attention, where we saw a pretty significant impact, and that's with hotel motel excise tax and meals excise tax. So those are two that are specifically related to economic activity. And you can see there, normally in the fiscal year, in a normal quarter, we see about $340,000, $325,000 per quarter for meals excise. But in the fourth quarter, we saw 220, which was a reduction from what we would normally see. And the same, although to a greater extent, the hotel motel excise, because the Courtyard Hotel in Lowell, I believe, was closed. So to move through some of the other categories here, licenses and permits, we saw a reduction in the fourth quarter in the licenses category. There had been some discussion about liquor licenses. However, that was not impacted in 2020 because those collections typically all happen right around the beginning of the calendar year as establishments are renewing their liquor licenses. So in fiscal year 2020, we did not see an impact to the budget from those establishments that sell alcohol. However, there will likely be an impact to the 2021 budget.
Rhonda, can I just clarify for the members and and the viewers, we are currently in fiscal year 2021. So just by way of information, this is the fourth quarter was
April, May, June of
last year. So these numbers will change naturally because of COVID moving into this fiscal year. So I just wanted to. It gets a little confusing, and I have to keep myself in track on what fiscal year and what we're in 3/4 of the way through fiscal year 2021.
Absolutely. And the city manager has mentioned before in city council meetings, but part of, we entered the COVID pandemic from a position of great financial strength. And that helped us a lot. And that's kind of the theme here is we were doing so well up until that March period that was able to carry us absolutely through FY 2020. We will be able to, with some of the reserves that we've accumulated, make it even further, but it will be the extent to which COVID impacts the economy and the budget that it will begin to start to impact our revenue capacity. So permits being the other category on the screen before you, you can see in Q2, we did really well, and overall on the year, the building permit category was buoyed by that Q2 performance. Intergovernmental revenue is typically the cherry sheets, so the state and local aid, and that is helpful to the city because those disbursements were not impacted in 2020. We get our local aid payments monthly from the state, and that is a steady, consistent form of revenue for the city that has allowed us to continue to provide the services to the resident. Charges for services, this includes the water, wastewater, and parking enterprise funds, which are at the bottom of the screen on this chart. And I will note that the parking enterprise took the biggest hit in the fourth quarter of FY 2020. You can see that there was $1.5 million in Q4, where normally we see a figure closer to 2.2 million. And if you were to drill into that enterprise fund even further, you would see that most of that was associated with the on-street parking revenue as opposed to the garage revenue. So just that's a point I wanted to make there. To talk a little bit more about the enterprise fund, so we've been talking mostly about the general fund up until now. In FY 2020, we saw an increase to wastewater and parking's fund balance, but a continued reduction in the water fund. And these are measures of the retained earnings, which are somewhat like free cash for an enterprise fund and are an indicator of their financial health. These next few charts talk in more detail about those revenues for the enterprise funds. This is on water. You can see that we still did pretty well in the local usage and did not need to use the retained earnings to balance the 2020 budget in water, but that did reduce a little bit of that fund balance. In wastewater here, the revenues did pretty well. And then finally in parking, as I mentioned a moment ago, you can see that the FY 20 actual was impacted in the fourth quarter, but what we would normally expect to see in the parking enterprise is an actual number much higher than what we budget because we are so conservative with our budget estimates for the enterprise funds. So that concludes the presentation. I know that's a lot of information, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. I'm actually good. Members of the subcommittee, additional questions on the presentation?
Yeah, I'd like to ask, make a comment here, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Council Conway.
Yeah, thank you very much. Connor, excellent report. I think it's, needless to say, very positive. And when you take a look at what we've gone through, and you've just gone through the fact that the capital projects are strong going forward, and I think that if you take a look at the fact that we're in the midst of a COVID virus and money is extremely tight, and this obviously shows that city manager and her team is right on top of this, and I think being very conservative with the money. Also, public safety is intact and doing well for the city too. So again, there are many cities throughout the state and throughout the country. They're running into so many different problems. And even though we're being faced with so many, I think that we're certainly staying above the water and actually moving forward in a very positive way. So again, I congratulate the team for doing a good job and continue with this route that we're on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Council Conway. Council Noon?
I'm all set, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Other members of the city council, any thoughts, questions, concerns on this part of the finance subcommittee meeting? Okay, hearing none. The other item on the agenda, well, two things I'd like to get to, Mr. Baldwin. One is FY21 update and on where we are at. And then I know the auditor is on the line with us. Wonder if there's any update on the audit and where we're at. And then I just want to get an update. I think Council Noon filed a motion on the CARES Act funding, which we received a report. I'd like to talk about that a little bit, if there's no objection from any members. So, Mr. Baldwin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief about the first 2 quarters of FY 2021. As the council knows, the city manager has continued the fiscal controls that are in place, and that applies to hiring as well as expenditures. We, because Congress has extended the end date for the CARES Act, we're able to use the $9.8 million that was allocated to Lowell to stretch us further, which is incredibly helpful. I will just note that additional help from Congress is much needed and is likely the only way that we'll be able to, us and other municipalities will be able to make it through. As it relates to the first 2 quarters of FY 2021, those expenditure controls are working. We're below 50% of the budget. We continue to be on top of expenditures, and we'll continue to do so through the end of FY 2021.
Can you just touch on revenues a little bit, knowing we saw a reduction in Q4 last fiscal year? Certainly, we probably know meals tax, hotel tax. How do they compare to last fiscal year, Mr. Baldwin?
They are down on a quarterly basis. I don't have the numbers right in front of me at the moment, but we are seeing something consistent with the fourth quarter, what you saw Q4 FY 2020, continue into 1 and 2 of 2021. So we will need to watch those and match the expenditures with the drop in revenue in order to maintain.
All right. However, we did budget accordingly, anticipating and adjusting those revenue figures for the FY21 budget. Correct.
That's right. We did reduce the revenue estimates. It's going to be even more important for the city manager and the council to keep an eye on the forecast so that we can plan as we begin, as I mentioned in the beginning, to plan for FY 2022 and beyond. And my deputy CFO, Allison, and I are working closely. We were awarded a grant with the Collins Center. They've been helping us update and fine tune our forecasting models so that we can incorporate all of these COVID-related reductions into our forecast, the best plan for the next few years for the city.
I think that's an important tool, and it's great to hear that we got that information. I think we learned about that at the last council meeting. What is your expectation when that modeling is complete, working with the Collins Center? I mean, moving forward with the unpredictability of so many things, forecasting revenue to develop a budget is going to be very important.
We're very close to being complete with our project, and I do expect sometime in March to have something to show the council. Specifically, we've been diving deeply into the charter schools, and we'll be presenting some information on the expense side, how we're forecasting the costs on the charter assessment, which will inform our budget planning.
That's great. That's good news. Questions from other members on FY21? Members of the subcommittee, other members of the council? Hearing none, let's go to the auditor. Tina, can you can you give us an update on how the audit is going, where we are at? Of course, we're all eager to hear the unreserved fund balance, knowing that typically it's been positive, but can you just give us an update on where we're at, please?
Sure. Thank you, Counselor Elliott. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Connor and I had a call with the outside auditors, which are Farrow and Sullivan, about, I want to say 10 days ago, and they are currently working through the single audit portion piece of the fiscal year 20 audit. The federal government came out with their yellow book standards a little bit later than normal, so they were behind on that. They've chosen their, I want to say, the 3 highest grossing grants, and they're doing some audit work on that as we speak, pretty much. And they're saying they should be wrapped up very soon. As far as I'm concerned, the general fund and our regular expenditures and revenues have all been audited, and there's been no, from what they say, no major findings. But we can't have anything official until they're done with the single audit. They did have a draft FIFA, a statement of expenditures of federal awards, but that's about the only document that we've gotten from them so far. But I can follow up with them and get a memo out to you and the council on an official status if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that'd be important. Do you anticipate that audit being complete by the time you leave in February, or will we have the management letter, or what's the schedule?
Truth be told, I would like them to be done, but we've pushed a little bit, but I don't know if they're going to be done. I believe
All right.
Connor, I don't want to speak for him, but the management letter, they had a draft, and we might be able to grab that from them.
And circulated for review to address? Okay.
Yeah, so I can get that to you guys.
Okay. Okay, anything else on the audit piece of this? No? Okay.
No.
Okay, the last item where we have 20 minutes left. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that we're addressing questions. I don't see any. Mr. Baldwin, can we just go to you? I think it was Councilor Noonan, refresh me if I'm I'm wrong, but a report on the CARES Act and the expenditures. Can we get an update on where that is at? Pardon me, and in particular, there is a piece of the CARE Act. It's the heirs piece that I did see in the. Excuse me, what's the acronym?
ESSER?
ESSER. I'm sorry, not heirs. ESSER. I did see that was funded once again. I think so. Significant funding will be coming into the city, in particular for the schools. But can you go through CARE funding? I know that it was referred to the subcommittee. I don't believe it was part of the agenda, but it'd be good to get an update in particular that ESSER money.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, there's a report on the regular City Council agenda this evening on the CARES Act funding in response to a motion by Councilor Noon.
Yeah.
We walk through the 9.8 million that the city was awarded, the different types of expenditures that the city has used or has encumbered or plans for that money. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, Congress extended the deadline from 12/30/2020 to 12/31/2021. And that is being used in large part for technology updates throughout the city for public participation, for remote work primarily, and a lot of technology related to facilitate that remote work, as well as public safety expenses related to overtime in the police and fire department, as well as in the health department and significant, and we've talked about this in the council meeting before, but to fund the testing that was done in the city prior to the end of the last calendar year. That was funded through the CARES Act money. A more detail is provided in that response that Mr. Ahmed wrote for the council, and I expect, I don't see him here, but that he'll have some information to share with the council as it relates to ESSER, which is a component of CARES. The CARES Act money was used to fund this, but it is an educational related grant program. The school was awarded, I want to say $4.8 million in the first round. And then part of the legislation that was passed at the end of the last congressional session included a significant amount more for the schools, upwards of $16 million. And it went to the schools in a way that I think is meant to help schools with facility needs as it relates to the classrooms, but also for other operational needs. And so there's an opportunity there. I don't know if there is a plan from the school department, but it may be worth something, perhaps in a joint subcommittee, or that we could get you a report on.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, but I'll go to Councilor Noon. It was your motion, so it's a good report. It's a lengthy report. It outlines where the money has been spent and really has kept projects, particularly in the Hamilton Canal District and, you know, in other areas, the schools, that that money was helpful. It's really good news that additional funding is coming, but I'll go to Councilor Noon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Connor, the CARE Act, first round, we got 9.8 million, right?
That's right, 9.8 million.
And so what we spend now, they allow us to carry this over till December out of that $9.8 million.
I'm sorry,
I know you
Councilor,
break-
you
Did
broke
you
up.
get that, Connor? It was break. Councilor Noon, could you just ask that question? You were breaking up.
Yeah, I'm
at the
sorry.
tail end. I
So-
think you were looking
so-
at how much have we spent and what the balance is.
Yes, sir. Yes, that's right.
I don't have the number right here in front of me. I off the top of my head, it's approximately 5 million or so that's been spent. And I neglected to mention that a large portion of that has been spent on the schools, and
Okay.
that's related to HVAC, air quality improvements, the filters that were put in the schools. So I didn't want to leave that unsaid, that a large part of the city's portion of the funding has been spent in support of the school facilities, aside
Oh,
from this money.
I see. So we do spend some of this money too on our first responders as well as public safety as well, right? The old time and stuff. Is that correct?
That's right.
And at least 1 million we spend on having a testing that we did about a month ago. Is that correct?
That's right. Between the two sites that were being run,
Right.
at Holly and at Showcase Cinema.
So do we have any plan as to what we're gonna go, what we're gonna do with the $4 million that's left, and hopefully the second round of CARE Act come in? Is there any plan, any program, any things that we have in place right now that we, gonna use this money for?
There is a plan, Counselor, and I see that the city manager is here. I don't want to steal her thunder. But the amounts that have been expended, and I just want to clarify that there are additional amounts that will be spent, but we haven't actually paid the bill yet. So those amounts are encumbered, and that number is larger. So we have them tied up in purchase orders, but for whatever reason, maybe because of we haven't received the supplies yet, we haven't actually expended the dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Connor.
So let me just clarify, the CARES Act money and the ESSA money are separate pots of money. In large part, the ESSA money is dedicated to the schools versus the components of the CARES Act that is essentially sort of dedicated to the city to pay funds, including, as you mentioned, Councilor, there was between testing and contact tracing were over $1 million. Police details, technological improvements, scanners, laptops for employees. So I think, that it does outline the report, but I think it'd be helpful. Money has been encumbered, it's been spent, it just hasn't been recorded on the books, I think, is what I'm gathering here. Madam Manager, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add, as Connor was explaining, when the CARES Act money was awarded, the expiration date was clearly December 30th, actually, of 2020. And we were told and advised over and over, use it or lose it. And so we had, followed that instruction. And then in the 11th hour, it was either late December or in January, they gave extra time. So we then, tried to go back and re-examine what had been expended. So that's the explanation of the history of the CARES Act. But the school department also did. So when we talk about the city, we're talking about the $9.8 million that the city side of the budget received. The school department also received some CARES Act money for school reopening. And then they also received ESSER grant money, which is ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. ESSER 2, they haven't actually received yet, but that's substantial. And so we're hopeful we can work collaboratively with the school department on their intended expenditures, going forward. If there's a way to.
Do we know what that dollar figure is in ESSER 2?
ESSER 2, I believe, is just under $17 million. ESSER 1, I believe Connor may have the figure. It was 4.8 million, 4.6 million that they received. And ESSER dollars are a little bit more flexible than the CARES Act money. CARES Act money.
I do recall that we did have a joint subcommittee, and I think it was suggested by one of the members that we do have a joint subcommittee. We did commit to it, so I'd entertain a motion that we request a joint meeting of the school committee and the finance subcommittee to talk about certainly ESSER money, but also financial status of.
And we also, which we are awaiting from the federal government, as was mentioned, President Biden signed an executive order saying that FEMA expenses would be reimbursed 100% instead of 75%, where historically it's always been a 75% reimbursement, and the community would be responsible for the other 25%. We are still awaiting clarification from the federal government if that order will be retroactive. If it is, then there's a possibility there would be additional CARES Act money that we were utilizing to pay 25% of FEMA expenses. So this will be, accounting for every dollar as we go forward, but we can bring that to the council and to the subcommittee to let you know. And then, of course, the hope is, I think, as Connor said, that we, through a stimulus effort that I know that's being debated in DC, that there is money for cities and states, particularly around lost revenues that haven't been satisfied. So we're watching very closely what's happening in Washington and around that stimulus package.
So what are the thoughts from the subcommittee? Do we want to meet with the school finance subcommittee and continue discussions about FY21? Conway?
I think that's a good idea. So once again, so that we, the left hand knows what the right hand is doing, so that I think we can plan better going forward.
Okay, motion by Councilor Conway, second by Councilor Noon to when we request city clerk reach out to the subcommittee, school department, superintendent, other members of the school committee to schedule a joint finance subcommittee. It'll be by Zoom, so I'm flexible. I don't know how members think, but if next Tuesday is good, let's throw that out there, Mr. Clark, and see what the response is. And
I'll send out a notice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. All those in favor of that motion signify by
Aye.
saying aye. And the opposed, that motion carries. 6:20, we have 10 minutes left. Unusual, any other thoughts, Madam Manager, Connor Baldwin, members of the subcommittee? Nope,
No
seeing none. Nope, okay. Seeing none, a motion to adjourn will be
Yes.
followed as a report of progress by Council Noon, seconded by Council Conway. All those in favor signify by saying aye. And opposed, that motion carries. This meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.